Raffaello Sanzio de Urbino, known as Raphael, was an Italian painter and architect of the High Renaissance. His work is admired for its clarity of form, ease of composition, and visual achievement of the Neoplatonic ideal of human grandeur. Together with Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci, he forms the traditional trinity of great masters of that period. Raphael was enormously productive, running an unusually large workshop and, despite his death at 37, leaving a large body of work. Many of his works are found in the Vatican Palace, where the frescoed Raphael rooms were the central, and the largest, work of his career. The best-known work is the School of Athens in the Vatican Stanza della Segnatura. After his early years in Rome, much of his work was executed by his workshop from his drawings, with considerable loss of quality. He was extremely influential in his lifetime, though outside Rome his work was mostly known from his collaborative printmaking. After his death, the influence of his great rival Michelangelo was more widespread until the 18th and 19th centuries, when Raphael's more serene and harmonious qualities were again regarded as the highest models. His career falls naturally into three phases and three styles, first described by Giorgio Vasari. His early years in Umbria, then a period of about 4 years absorbing the artistic traditions of Florence, followed by his last hectic and triumphant 12 years in Rome, working for 2 popes and their close associates. Urbino. Raphael was born in the small but artistically significant central Italian city of Urbino in the Marche region, where his father Giovanni Santi was court painter to the Duke. The reputation of the court had been established by Federico III da Montefeltro, a highly successful condottiere who had been created Duke of Urbino by the Pope. Urbino formed part of the Papal States, and who died the year before Raphael was born. The emphasis of Federico's court was rather more literary than artistic, but Giovanni Santi was a poet of sorts as well as a painter, and had written a rhymed chronicle of the life of Federico, and both wrote the texts and produced the decor for masque-like court entertainments. His poem to Federico shows him as keen to show awareness of the most advanced North Italian painters, and early Netherlandish artists as well. In the very small court of Urbino he was probably more integrated into the central circle of the ruling family than most court painters. Federico was succeeded by his son Guidobaldo da Montefeltro, who married Elisabetta Gonzaga, daughter of the ruler of Mantua, the most brilliant of the smaller Italian courts for both music and the visual arts. Under them, the court continued as a center for literary culture. Growing up in the circle of this small court gave Raphael the excellent manners and social skills stressed by Vasari. Court life in Urbino at just after this period was to become set as the model of the virtues of the Italian humanist court through Baldassare Castiglione's depiction of it in his classic work The Book of the Courtier, published in 1528. Castiglione moved to Urbino in 1504, when Raphael was no longer based there but frequently visited, and they became good friends. He became close to other regular visitors to the court. Pietro Bibbiena and Pietro Bembo, both later cardinals, were already becoming well known as writers, and would be in Rome during Raphael's period there. Raphael mixed easily in the highest circles throughout his life. One of the factors that tended to give a misleading impression of effortlessness to his career. He did not receive a full humanistic education, however. It is unclear how easily he read Latin. Early life and work. His mother Magia died in 1491 when Raphael was 8, followed on August 1, 1494 by his father, who had already remarried. Raphael was thus orphaned at 11. His formal guardian became his only paternal uncle Bartolomeo, a priest. who subsequently engaged in litigation with his stepmother. He probably continued to live with his stepmother when not staying as an apprentice with a master. He had already shown talent, according to Vasari, who says that Raphael had been a great help to his father. A brilliant self-portrait drawing from his teenage years shows his precocious talent. His father's workshop continued, and probably together with his stepmother, Raphael evidently played a part in managing it from a very early age. In Urbino, he came into contact with the works of Paolo Uccello, previously the court painter, and Luca Signorelli, who until 1498 was based in nearby Città di Castello. According to Vasari, his father placed him in the workshop of the Umbrian master Pietro Perugino as an apprentice, despite the tears of his mother. The evidence of an apprenticeship comes only from Vasari in another source, and has been disputed. 8 was very early for an apprenticeship to begin. An alternative theory is that he received at least some training from Timoteo Viti, who acted as court painter in Urbino from 1495. But most modern historians agree that Raphael at least worked as an assistant to Perugino from around 1500. The influence of Perugino on Raphael's early work is very clear. Probably no other pupil of genius has ever absorbed so much of his master's teaching as Raphael did, according to Wulflin. Vasari wrote that it was impossible to distinguish between their hands at this period, but many modern art historians claimed to do better and detect his hand in specific areas of works by Perugino or his workshop. Apart from stylistic closeness, their techniques are very similar as well, for example having paint applied thickly, using an oil varnish medium, in shadows and darker garments, but very thinly on flesh areas. An excessive resin in the varnish often causes cracking of areas of paint in the works of both masters. The Perugino workshop was active in both Perugia and Florence, perhaps maintaining two permanent branches. Raphael is described as a master, that is to say fully trained, in December 1500. His first documented work was the Baronetcy altarpiece for the Church of St. Nicholas of Tolentino in Città di Castello, a town halfway between Perugia and Urbino. Evangelista da Pia di Melita, who had worked for his father, was also named in the commission. It was commissioned in 1500 and finished in 1501. Now only some cut sections and a preparatory drawing remain. In the following years he painted works for other churches there, including the Mont Crucifixion and the Brera Wedding of the Virgin, and for Perugia, such as the Oddi altarpiece. He very probably also visited Florence in this period. These are large works, some in fresco, where Raphael confidently marshals his compositions in the somewhat static style of Perugino. He also painted many small and exquisite cabinet paintings in these years, probably mostly for the connoisseurs in the Urbino court, like the Three Graces and Saint Michael, and he began to paint Madonnas and portraits. In 1502 he went to Siena at the invitation of another pupil of Perugino, Pinturicchio. Being a friend of Raphael and knowing him to be a draftsman of the highest quality, to help with the cartoons, and very likely the designs, for a fresco series in the Piccolomini Library in Siena Cathedral. He was evidently already much in demand even at this early stage in his career. The Mont Crucifixion, 1502-3, very much in the style of Perugino. The Coronation of the Virgin, 1502-3. The Wedding of the Virgin, Raphael's most sophisticated altarpiece of this period. St. George and the Dragon, a small work for the court of Urbino. Influence of Florence. Raphael led a nomadic life, working in various centers in northern Italy, but spent a good deal of time in Florence, perhaps from about 1504, although there is traditional reference to a Florentine period of about 1504-8. He was possibly never a continuous resident there. He may have needed to visit the city to secure materials in any case. There is a letter of recommendation of Raphael, dated October 1504, from the mother of the next Duke of Urbino to the Gonfaloniere of Florence. The bearer of this will be found to be Raphael, painter of Urbino, who, being greatly gifted in his profession, has determined to spend some time in Florence to study. And because his father was most worthy and I was very attached to him, and the son is a sensible and well-mannered young man, on both accounts, I bear him great love. As earlier with Perugino and others, Raphael was able to assimilate the influence of Florentine art, whilst keeping his own developing style. Frescoes in Perugia of about 1505 show a new monumental quality in the figures which may represent the influence of Fra Bartolomeo, who Vasari says was a friend of Raphael. But the most striking influence in the work of these years is Leonardo da Vinci, who returned to the city from 1500 to 1506. Raphael's figures begin to take more dynamic and complex positions, and though as yet his painted subjects are still mostly tranquil, he made drawn studies of fighting nude men, one of the obsessions of the period in Florence. Another drawing is a portrait of a young woman that uses the three-quarter-length pyramidal composition of the just completed Mona Lisa, but still looks completely Raphaelesque. Another of Leonardo's compositional inventions, the pyramidal Holy Family, was repeated in a series of works that remain among his most famous easel paintings. There is a drawing by Raphael in the royal collection of Leonardo's Lost Leader and the Swan, from which he adapted the contrapposto pose of his own Saint Catherine of Alexandria. He also perfects his own version of Leonardo's sfumato modeling, to give subtlety to his painting of flesh, and develops the interplay of glances between his groups, which are much less enigmatic than those of Leonardo. But he keeps the soft clear light of Perugino in his paintings. Leonardo was more than 30 years older than Raphael, but Michelangelo, who was in Rome for this period, was just 8 years his senior. Michelangelo already disliked Leonardo, and in Rome came to dislike Raphael even more, attributing conspiracies against him to the younger man. Raphael would have been aware of his works in Florence, but in his most original work of these years, he strikes out in a different direction. His deposition of Christ draws on classical sarcophagi to spread the figures across the front of the picture space in a complex and not wholly successful arrangement. Wolflin detects the influence of the Madonna in Michelangelo's Doni Tondo in the kneeling figure on the right, but the rest of the composition is far removed from his style, or that of Leonardo. Though highly regarded at the time, and much later forcibly removed from Perugia by the Borghese, it stands rather alone in Raphael's work. His classicism would later take a less literal direction. The Anside Madonna, 1505, beginning to move on from Perugino. The Madonna of the Meadow, 1506, using Leonardo's pyramidal composition for subjects of the Holy Family. Saint Catherine of Alexandria, 1507, borrows from the pose of Leonardo's Leader. Deposition of Christ, 1507, drawing from Roman sarcophagi, Roman period. The Vatican stands. By the end of 1508, he had moved to Rome, where he lived for the rest of his life. He was invited by the new Pope Julius II, perhaps at the suggestion of his architect Donato Bramante, then engaged on St. Peter's, who came from just outside Urbino and was distantly related to Raphael. Unlike Michelangelo, who had been kept hanging around in Rome for several months after his first summons, Raphael was immediately commissioned by Julius to fresco what was intended to become the Pope's private library at the Vatican Palace. This was a much larger and more important commission than any he had received before. He had only painted one altarpiece in Florence itself. Several other artists and their teams of assistants were already at work on different rooms, many painting over recently completed paintings commissioned by Julius's loathed predecessor, Alexander VI, whose contributions and arms Julius was determined to efface from the palace. Michelangelo, meanwhile, had been commissioned to paint the Sistine Chapel ceiling. This first of the famous stands, or Raphael rooms, to be painted, now always known as the stanza della Segnatura after its use in Vasari's time, was to make a stunning impact on Roman art, and remains generally regarded as his greatest masterpiece, containing the School of Athens, the Parnassus and the Disputa. Raphael was then given further rooms to paint, displacing other artists including Perugino and Signorelli. He completed a sequence of 3 rooms, each with paintings on each wall and often the ceilings too, increasingly leaving the work of painting from his detailed drawings to the large and skilled workshop team he had acquired, who added a 4th room, probably only including some elements designed by Raphael, after his early death in 1520. The death of Julius in 1513 did not interrupt the work at all, as he was succeeded by Raphael's last pope, the Medici Pope Leo X, with whom Raphael formed an even closer relationship, and who continued to commission him. Raphael's friend Cardinal Bibbiena was also one of Leo's old tutors, and a close friend and advisor. Raphael was clearly influenced by Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel ceiling in the course of painting the room. Vasari said Bramante let him in secretly, and the scaffolding was taken down in 1511 from the first completed section. The reaction of other artists to the daunting force of Michelangelo was the dominating question in Italian art for the following few decades, and Raphael, who had already shown his gift for absorbing influences into his own personal style, rose to the challenge perhaps better than any other artist. One of the first and clearest instances was the portrait in the School of Athens of Michelangelo himself, as Heraclitus, which seems to draw clearly from the Sibyls and Aeneudi of the Sistine ceiling. Other figures in that and later paintings in the room show the same influences, but are still cohesive with the development of Raphael's own style. Michelangelo accused Raphael of plagiarism, and years after Raphael's death, complained in a letter that everything he knew about art he got from me, although the quotations show more generous reactions. These very large and complex compositions have been regarded ever since as among the supreme works of the grand manner of the High Renaissance, and the classic art of the post-antique West. They give a highly idealized depiction of the forms represented, and the compositions, though very carefully conceived in drawings, achieve sprezzatura, a term invented by his friend Castiglione, who defined it as a certain nonchalance which conceals all artistry and makes whatever one says or does seem uncontrived and effortless. According to Michael Levy, Raphael gives his figures a superhuman clarity and grace in a universe of Euclidean certainties. The painting is nearly all of the highest quality in the first 2 rooms, but the later compositions in the stands, especially those involving dramatic action, are not entirely as successful either in conception or their execution by the workshop. Stanza della Segnatura, the Mass at Bolsena, 1514. Stanza di Eliodoro, Deliverance of St. Peter, 1514. Stanza di Eliodoro, The Fire in the Borgo, 1514. Stanza dell'Incendio del Borgo, painted by the workshop to Raphael's design. Other projects. The Vatican projects took most of his time, although he painted several portraits, including those of his 2 main patrons, the Popes Julius II and his successor Leo X, the former considered one of his finest. Other portraits were of his own friends, like Castiglione, or the immediate papal circle. Other rulers pressed for work, and King Francis I of France was sent 2 paintings as diplomatic gifts from the Pope. For Agostino Chigi, the hugely rich banker and papal treasurer, he painted the Triumph of Galatea and designed further decorative frescoes for his Villa Farnesina, and painted 2 chapels in the churches of Santa Maria della Pace and Santa Maria del Popolo. He also designed some of the decoration for the Villa Madama, the work in both villas being executed by his workshop. One of his most important papal commissions was the Raphael Cartoons, a series of 10 cartoons, of which 7 survive, for tapestries with scenes of the lives of St. Paul and St. Peter, for the Sistine Chapel. The cartoons were sent to Brussels to be woven in the workshop of Pierre van Aelst. It is possible that Raphael saw the finished series before his death. They were probably completed in 1520. He also designed and painted the Loggie at the Vatican, a long thin gallery then open to a courtyard on one side, decorated with Roman-style brochure. He produced a number of significant altarpieces, including the Ecstasy of St. Cecilia and the Sistine Madonna. His last work, on which he was working up to his death, was a large Transfiguration, which together with Il Spasimo shows the direction his art was taking in his final years, more proto-Baroque than Mannerist. Triumph of Galatea, 1512, his only major mythology, for Chigi's Villa. The Miraculous Draught of Fishes, 1515, one of the 7 remaining Raphael cartoons for tapestries. Il Spasimo, 1517, brings a new degree of expressiveness to his art. Transfiguration, 1520, unfinished at his death.